I think you argue at the end of the book that, and let's put it in the context of the current genocide, where I think that the mask, Israel's attempt, and you write about these investing all sorts of money to change perception, control academic studies, intimidate the media. That mask has really dropped away with this live streamed genocide. I don't think it's coming back. But you argue at the end of the book that in essence the lobby is counterproductive to Israeli interests itself. So let's talk about since October 7th, the role of the lobby, what it's done, and I think it's kind of spinning its wheels in the mud. I don't think that it's working.
No, it's not. It kind of decided to frame as its enemies young people, conscientious sections of the American civil society, minority groups, people who maybe, people mainstream America may consider some of them naive, but very few people would regard them as immoral or enemies of the state. And this is the main problem of the lobby now. Its enemies are people that actually have a spirit that in the past American used to admire. Secondly, some of them belong actually to the American elites, definitely the students, and and the whole discourse that is brought that the lobby is trying to fight is a moral discourse. It's not, and they, yes, you can bomb a moral discourse to a certain extent. We saw it in the pressure to, on the presidents of universities or Jewish alumni withdrawing money from certain universities. So you can still use money and force, but you don't really kill a movement of solidarity that has the same impulses that the anti-Vietnam movement had, that the civil rights movement had. You cannot kill it with money, and therefore you're right. They're stuck in the mud because it's not a question of convincing the American Congress to give more money to Israel or sell more arms. Yes, they can still do that, but they have never had the right methods, and they will never have, I think, the right weapons, if you want, to fight against systemic changes in public opinion that are based on moral values, on knowing the reality, or, as you say rightly, on the daily images of a genocide. Uh, there is a limit in the 21st century how much you can do that, and they don't have the kit of tools anymore to deal with it, and therefore I don't think they would be succeeding unless other factors would not change public opinion in a direction that I think it is changing. And of course, they still have the chunk of, you call it the Trump, maybe the Trump base in America. They can still unite with them. There's no need to pressure these guys. But they understand that they're losing a very important section of the divided American society.
Well, and they've lost the facade. I mean, they may get support from
Absolutely.
Trump, but they've
Absolutely.
lost that facade. And just to buttress that point, you write, the way AIPAC decided who Israel's enemies were often had very little to do with the actual policies, which were frequently to Israel's advantage. They decided simply based on how obedient an administration was to the lobby. America's endorsement of the Oslo Accords was not a milestone on the road to peace for AIPAC, but a testimony to its own failure to influence American policy. And you make that point throughout the book, that it no longer becomes whether it's good or bad for Israel, but they have to constantly assert their hegemony within the American political system.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think on the way they lost some of their own people, especially those who were more bipartisan in their view, people who were more democratic, or came from the Democratic Party into AIPAC. Even Martin Indyk, who just passed away this year, eventually was more against the lobby, and we remember him being a pillar of the lobby. So they also
Well,
lost
didn't
some.
he worked for AIPAC, didn't he?
He worked for AIPAC, and then he became quite a strong critic of AIPAC later on. So they are even losing some of their own, stars, if you want, of the past because they are going too far as a kind of a mafia kind of organization.
So let's talk about, just to close, where you think we're headed.
Yeah.
And I just want to be clear. I mean, you and I have both been targeted, but this is not a disinterested discussion. We have both been targeted by APAC. I think you were denied. Where was it? You were
I was
denied.
detained in
Detained.
Detroit for 2.5 hours. Yes.
Right. Yeah, I was detained in Newark. So
Okay.
for about 2.5 hours too,
Okay.
even though I
So
had a valid American passport.
yeah.
Um, but let's talk about where you think we're headed. I mean,
Yeah.
I think you and this book and Mearsheimer's book are very, very important for people who want to understand how the machinery works. Where are we going?
I think in terms of the lobbying in America in particular, but also in Britain, in a way, I think the lobby is losing its efficiency and efficacy, although it still has the power, of course, to change policies. And I think its major problem in America, and I'm not an expert on American politics, but I think its major problem in America is that although it allied itself now totally with the Republican Party, the Republican Party itself has very strong elements of isolationism that even led to a very different kind of more careful policy towards military aid to the Ukraine, not only to Israel. I think the main problem for AIPAC is that not only Israel is not considered anymore a moral value, a moral asset to a young American generation. I think the more cynical parts of the United States may not think about it anymore as a strategic asset or economic asset, given the way Israel is imploding from within, its inability to deal with the its own kind of right wing, the emergence of strong right wing elements that are usurping the government and the state. And therefore, I think we're heading into a very volatile chapter in the history of modern Israel and Palestine, where Israel is going to be a very fierce, cruel, brutal force whose victims will be mainly Palestinians, but not only Palestinians. And it would be very difficult for American administration to consider it as a reliable ally or an easy ally to deal with, although they will be still committed because of their own interests in the area. But I think because of that, the lobby would find it far more difficult to find allies beyond Christian Zionists, the most basic base of Trump. They're losing the Jewish community. They're definitely losing the young Jewish community. So in the long run, I do think that lobbying for Israel and Zionism 10 or 15 years from now, the way Israel is developing, will be a far more difficult job to do, even in an America that may not go the progressive democratic way, even if it for a while will go towards the direction of Trump or the Republicans and so on. Uh, it's not an asset anymore for the cynical Americans, for the more conscientious Americans. I think that we are witnessing the last chapter in the history of that lobby. But I'm an historian, and when I say last chapter, unfortunately, it means few years, not 1 year or two.
And how do you see the genocide playing out? I don't have an answer to that question, and you may not either.
Yeah,
How do you see it? What is the denouement of, what are we, 10, 11 months now of
yeah. Well,
this?
I'm afraid to say that the next 10, 11 months are much of the same, in the sense that Israel has taken half of its army out of the Gaza Strip, and it's now allowing a kind of an attrition war between itself and what remains of the military force of the Hamas. I don't think they have a strategy beyond that because they are not willing to go along with the idea. At least Netanyahu is not willing to go along with the idea of replacing the Hamas with another Palestinian government or an Arab Palestinian government. And anyway, I don't see the potential partners for this anyway. Uh, it's it's uh, it's a genocide on a less intensified one than we have seen, but it's incremental. It continues. And I think in the end, and I don't know if it's a year or 2 or 3 years from now, it would be something that important regional and international actors would not tolerate. They're still tolerating it, but will not tolerate. Now, not tolerating the genocide could be a regional war with Iran and Lebanon and maybe other factors. Not tolerating could be something we're hearing now from the Labour government, maybe, from the backbenches and so on, and we should pay attention to this, of even people in the global states, in the global north, thinking that Israel needs to be treated differently. We definitely already heard it from the ICJ and the ICC. I really believe that Israel, as it stands now, doesn't stand a chance of surviving in the long run as a Jewish state. But again, I'm warning that before that would happen, before there is a collapse or disintegration, there is a very dangerous period of that state trying to do all it can without any inhibitions to maintain its power, its survival. And I'm very worried for the short run, including a continuation of the genocide, and not just in Gaza, also in the West Bank. But I really think that if I were a young Palestinian, I would hopefully believe that I'm young enough, hopefully, to see something else in a more distant future. And I really believe in it, not just, it's not a wishful thinking. It's not a word of an activist. Really, it's someone who follows the history of Israel and Zionism. I'm 100% convinced we are at the midst of the last chapter in this Zionist project in Palestine. And last chapters are violent, they are decolonization kind of chapters. I'm worried, and at the same time, I'm more hopeful for the long distance.